Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
James Brining is the artistic director of the West Yorkshire Playhouse. Born and raised in Leeds, he returned to the city in 2012 following over a decade working in Scotland, latterly as the artistic director of Dundee Rep. He's speaking to us at British Theatre Guide at the end of the second week of rehearsals for a new production of Sunshine on Leith, the feel-good musical based on the songs of the Proclaimers, which was first staged in 2007. James, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Let's talk first about that show, Sunshine on Leith. You directed its first production at Dundee Rep in 2007.
Yeah.
What made you return to it now?
Oh, a few factors. I guess, it was a show that was important for Dundee Rep in that Stephen Greenhorn, the writer, and I were keen to... I'd done a couple of musicals from the repertoire, Gypsy, Flora the Red Menace, before, and the company there were not necessarily musical theatre performers, but they were good actors who were musically strong. And so, in a way, we set ourselves an ambition of making a new musical, a new Scottish musical. And it took us 2 or 3 years to develop it from some of the first ideas to actually realising the show in 2007. And it was successful in that we did it 3 times over the course of 3 years. It toured. It was sort of one of the best musical in the first year it was done, the TMA Awards. So we were really pleased with it. And in a way, when I left Scotland and came down to Leeds, it felt like a natural ending to that. Just as I was leaving Dundee, a film producer phoned me and asked me whether I thought it would make a good movie. And I said, well, there's any reason why not. And it was then turned into a very successful film, actually, with Peter Mullen and Jane Horrocks. And I thought no more of it. But I think what happened between the film being made and us now is that the film itself raised the profile of the show and brought it to a sort of popular attention in a way that when it was just the Dundee Rep production, it was a kind of very, very popular show for people who saw it. But its audience wasn't necessarily getting beyond people who like the Proclaimers' music. So I was looking for a show to finish our kind of programme of activity in the Quarry Theatre before we go into our redevelopment. And I wanted a show that felt celebratory and felt like it was about... Well, it would create a brilliant vibe for an audience, and that also explored notions around community and home and belonging. And it was partly reflecting back on Sunshine Leith and the feeling that post-film there was going to be a production of it. And I guess as the first director, there was always a feeling that I would have the opportunity to do it again if that was going to happen. So a number of factors sort of led me to seriously consider it as a possibility at this time for us. But I think more than anything else, the thing that ultimately convinced me was its thematic content. And the fact that its thematic content feels as pertinent, if not more pertinent now, than perhaps even when we made it. And I guess the thematic content that's interesting to me is the notion of what is home, where is home, and the notion of community and communities. So when I first created it, Stephen Greenhorn, the writer, who's Scottish, lived in London. I, English, lived in Scotland. The kind of mixed up nature of Britain, I suppose, of where you affiliate and what values and cultural values you sort of congregate around. And the Proclaimers' music is brilliant, I think, for a theatre production because each song is a little story. And they write about extraordinary things. They're not typical pop music. They write about falling in love and about falling out of love, but they also write about infidelity, about what it's like to be cheated on, about what it's like to be the cheater. They write about the death of parents, losing children, about growing up, about gambling, about politics. So their songs have this range, and it just felt that where we are in Britain today, post an independence referendum, post the Brexit referendum, questions about who we are as a nation, who we are as the UK in Europe, who we are as the UK together, it just feels very, very fertile. There's also some of the play is set in a hospital, and the notion of what the NHS is and our values of the NHS and the idea of public service and the idea of the individual's ambition, which can sometimes be in tension with the responsibility to the collective. They all feel really, really pertinent themes to me. So ultimately, I think it was the opportunity to do it again with the momentum that the film has provided. Since announcing it and starting to work on it, I am amazed by the amount of people down here who say, oh, I love that film, or I love the Proclaimers' music. I'm sort of staggered, and I think the film has really penetrated kind of popular culture And across generations, I've got, my kids, their pals love it. Right. And they're in their teenagers. Older people, there's a whole range of people who really like this show. Another thing is, and there's a lot of discussion of class in theatre at the minute. It represents ordinary people on stage. And it doesn't do that in a patronising way. It just does it because that's what these people are about. And I really believe that we shouldn't just be representing certain classes, in our theatre. And it's a show which is very popular, very direct, very sentimental, in best sense of the word, very celebratory. And when it says feel-good musical, I kind of think it is a feel-good music, but it also is dramatically serious and credible and is about things. So for me, it's a real joy to return to it. I do remember one of my board members, when I was discussing it, sort of questioned me why I would be doing a musical set in Edinburgh, a show set in Edinburgh. And my riposte was, well, you didn't ask me that when we did Pygmalion, which was set in London. And we were equidistant between Edinburgh and London. And maybe it's natural for me, as somebody from Leeds who lived in Scotland for nearly 16, 17 years, to not necessarily gravitate in my perspective from a London point of view. The vast majority of people in this country don't live in the southeast. And I think it's healthy to look at life through other people's eyes, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing that from a kind of Scottish point of view as much as from a London point of view.
That's really interesting, the journey it's been on as well, in terms of your journey returning to Leeds, which is a city that you called home for a long time, and kind of bringing back this show.
It's really interesting. I mean, people, when I got this job, everybody says to me when they know I'm from Leeds, "Oh, it must be great to go home." I mean, actually, I felt more at home in Scotland. Not that I do in Leeds. Leeds is where I'm from, but it's such a subjective thing. Home. Stephen now lives in Scotland, having moved back from London. I now live in England, having moved away from Scotland. I went around the circle. The majority of the actors are Scottish, and I said, "How many of you live in England?" Half of them live in England, half of them live in Scotland. Their own relationship with what it means to be Scottish, the independence referendum, the people who lived in London who didn't have a vote, the people who did live, it's so complex. And I expect, and in a way, children have been born, conceived over the course of the life of this show. It's a very sort of human story. And I'm really loving coming back to it and exploring it again. And everybody's perspective is slightly different, whatever age they are, say within the company. People who are just starting out, people who are been around for longer. Everybody's relationship with what they think of as home is, I think it's a great subject for theatre to explore.
Are you finding, as you're re-exploring that material, are you making changes? Are you I think you've had Stephen Greenhorn sort of with you as part of the process. Has he been sort of looking at it and going, "Oh yeah, I've always wondered about that bit"?
Well, it's interesting. I guess his writing has always been political. When he was younger, he wrote for 784 in Scotland, and politics of his writing was quite present. And we think this is a political story, but it's not overtly political. It doesn't sort of bang a particular drum. When we first did it, it moved a lot from the first to the second tour, and it kind of settled. So the second and third tours were what we'd achieved. What was interesting was when he did the film, he made one quite significant narrative change, which, although a detail,
presumably,
I won't spoil it, but a narrative that I think considerably charged it in a certain way, increased the jeopardy of a particular narrative strand. So that's a new thing for me to handle and to place in the show. The other thing that he's done, of course, is it's interesting. When he wrote it, there's different generations of couples in the show. When he wrote it, I think he and I were probably thinking of ourselves as the 30-something couple who were sort of facing that sort of choice about what we wanted to do with settling down. And I think now
it's brothers, is it?
Yeah, well, it's two friends.
Right.
A bloke in his early 30s, a bloke in his mid 20s,
right.
And their parents, his parents. And I think probably now Stephen is the generation of the parents. Right. So, and many of the references over 12, 13 years, the references have needed to be updated. I mean, I think when he wrote it, it was 2007, and that's when it was set. It was set, and the two male characters are coming back from the war in Iraq. I didn't want to just say, let's keep it in 2007. So we've moved it forward to pretty much now. So it doesn't quite interrogate Iraq in the same way that it did. So we have shifted it so that it still feels about now. So that's been an interesting... And also the cultural references. I'm working with people and you kind of say, does this cultural reference make any sense? And the younger members of the company say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes.
That's interesting as well, so to make it feel very current. And I guess we've also made a stylistic shift in our approach to the show. The only two people who worked on it originally are me and Stephen. Every other aspect of it is different, and I didn't want to just repeat what we'd done before. So the musical side of it, of course, the songs, many of the songs are the same. We've added some numbers, but the arrangements are all completely different, new arrangements. And actually working with Dave Shrubsole, who's a really clever kind of creative artist to work with, what we're trying to do more than last time is to foreground the music itself, because in a way the show is a celebration of two brilliant musicians' work. And if last time it was more traditionally a pit band with action happening on stage, as you might expect from a kind of more traditional piece of musical theatre, we've got acting musicians, we've got a band who are on stage, and the music is more woven into the storytelling than it was before. So stylistically, we are kind of breaking new ground for ourselves. And so having seen the show like Girl from the North Country, for instance, it's a sort of, there's a relationship between those two shows. I think Girl from the North Country is an extraordinary kind of poetic meditation on mortality. This feels a more front-footed, audience-engaging, gig. But I think they kind of, you can see how they relate to each other rather than a band that you can't see starts playing and the character starts singing. And the music is more present.
Right. Well, I was going to say, something along the lines of, that feels like a very current thing to have acting musicians, have the music sort of, this idea of the gig show, the gig theatre. But then again, 784 were doing it in
Absolutely,
the 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not necessarily, an of-the-moment thing, but it does feel like there are a lot of companies really interested, a lot of great shows that they're really interested in the power of live music as part of storytelling.
I was discussing it with somebody who was sitting in rehearsal today, who was kind of questioning the relationship between the material, the Proclaimers material, which is very real, about real things, and the fantasy, if you like, of musical theatre, and how those two things sit together. And there are shows that have been successful. Billy Elliot is one, Blood Brothers, Our House. And it's possible to make a musical about set in the contemporary British world. But I think there's an interesting stylistic tension there. And I think what the music being there in front of us does is it kind of authenticates the experience. There's no sort of pretense. We are singing a song and you can see how that music's generated. I also think the gig theatre thing, I think that for me, thematically, I've already said the show is about community and home, and what I want to do is to create a sense of a community for the audience. So when they walk into our space, they're in a communal space in which music and drinking, because there's a bar on stage, can take place. So that you can sort of slide from an audience watching some performers performing a Proclaimers song into a story. And at the end of the show, and I won't spoil it by saying what the last song is, but it's one of the more well-known songs, that actually you end up with a load of musicians performing a great barnstorming Proclaimers number, to which the audience will be invited to sort of participate in the way a gig does. So it feels to me thematically kind of consistent, really, that approach, and that it unlocks the themes of the piece that I'm interested in, to place it in that context and say you are necessary, audience, for this event to be complete, not sit quietly and applaud at the appropriate times.
Thank you. And that's sort of clearly behind a lot of those gig theatre-y type shows, that same kind of sense of crossing that, what might be a boundary between audience and performance. Your work at Dundee Rep was really praised, including Sunshine and Leith, was really praised for the sort of the ensemble that you created there, the way that facilitated certain ways of working, certain kind of approaches to theatre. Is that something which you feel you're sort of bringing back with you, those methods, in a very different setting, or how's that?
No and yes. I think no in the sense, and just to be fair to my predecessor Hamish Glenn, it was him who set up the ensemble in 1999 as a kind of experiment with specific funding, and I think he was finding it difficult in Dundee. I just like the turnover of doing shows, getting people to come work there. There's not a big indigenous population of actors in Dundee, most in Scotland are based in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and obviously down south as well. So he set that company up, and it ran for 3-4 years when I took over. And I mean, there was a choice to not to carry on working in that way, but what I learned over that 10-year period from 3 or 4 of the actors continued through that period of time, and some of those actors are still there, having employed in the same theatre for 18 years. That's kind of, when people talk about a rep ensemble and doing it for a year or 9 months or 6 months, it is a different animal. And it's great, and I love the fact that people are doing it, and we're going to do it ourselves during our redevelopment period. But there's something about the durational nature of those relationships, creative and personal, that takes the work into a different sort of place. And it can be a challenge in the sense in which the short-term relationship of an actor and a director coming together and it working or not working, you don't need to have the honest conversation at the end of that about it. You can just say, I'm not working with that person again, I don't want to go there. When you sit down at the end of a show and say to an actor, well, can we just talk about the last 6 months? And they have the right to say to you as a director, well, I don't think you were very good, or you weren't prepared, or you didn't do this. There's a sort of brutal honesty to that relationship that I think can deepen the work. And between actors as well. The other challenge with an ensemble in that way is that actors can sometimes get tired or bored or overworked or underworked, and the challenge for us was to keep it feeling fresh and alive. And we did that by, in a way, having a slightly bastardised version of an ensemble, in the sense in which we had a core of 8 plus 2 graduates who joined us every year and moved on. So there was always sort of young talent joining the company, and then doing shows and inviting people to join. So when I did Sweeney Todd, in fact when I did Sunshine and Leith, the company was 18, so we brought 8 actors to join. And some of those actors were returners and some were complete newcomers. That kind of kept the whole model alive. You could also split the company up and do two-handers. We took shows to Tehran, Mexico, went to the Barbican a number of times, we toured to England as well as Scotland, Ireland, So the real challenge was to find shows that you could make on that company of those particular actors, not exclusively, but to hook it on those actors. In a way, that simplified programming, because you went, well, there's 90% of repertoire that you can't do, so concentrate on these plays, and let's make new plays with these actors in mind. So essentially, it was conceived with the core ensemble in mind over about 3 years before we actually did it, and then being able to work in a way. I think I rehearsed for 8 weeks originally, because there was another show in rehearsal which opened in the course of Sunshine Leith rehearsals, and that time it's really, really precious to be able to work in that way. So I absolutely loved working in that manner. And what I learnt, I think, because there's also Scottish Dance Theatre which is part of Dundee Rep. So we had an ensemble, we had a company of 20 actors and dancers who were there, who were employees. It's a rare thing in a British theatre. They'd been employed longer than most of the other staff, marketing, production, front of house. And I really believe that a theatre that doesn't have actors in it is just a place that puts plays on. Theatre, I mean, the great companies of the historical past, Molière, Brecht, Shakespeare, they're based on actors. And I mean, I think when I came to Leeds, I really felt the absence. It felt like a theatre where actors came and went. And sometimes they had a nice time and they were nice, and sometimes they didn't have a nice time, and we'd, but actually I really missed that. And I think that's one of the problems with theatre that doesn't have actors at the heart. That's why great companies, often have actors who return. And one of the things I've tried to do here since I've been in Leeds is to build a sense of that community, and we're going to be building on that in the redevelopment period. Can
you say a bit more about how you've done that so far, and then maybe we can also talk about this redevelopment period that the ensemble in that?
Well, I think it's, in a way, for me, coming back to England after 17 years, I didn't know many English actors. So I was sort of starting from scratch again. What I've really enjoyed over the last 2 or 3 years is people coming back to join, and actors who you've got a relationship with and know the building. And so Rhys Dinsdale is an example of a local actor. He's an associate artist here. You can have a conversation with him where you kind of go, without any real agenda, well, what kind of thing are you interested in? And so, for instance, when I did the Master Builder, Fall of the Master Builder, new version, I talked to Rhys about that. Let's do something together. Let's look at plays. We read a few plays. We then talked about what I wanted to do with the Master Builder. Talked to Zinni.
Zinni Harris.
Yeah, exactly. And then we built that show over a period of time again. So we were also trying to, through our artist development program, starting to reach out to particularly local actors. I think for me, it's about the ecology. And I think one of the challenges in Leeds is the theatrical ecology isn't as rich or developed as it is in some other cities in Britain. And I think part of the reason for that is the fact that there's only one producing theatre, this one. And in other cities that I've lived in, like Glasgow, where you've got the Sits and the Tron, or in Edinburgh, where you've got the Travis and the Lyceum, or Bristol, where you've got the Tobacco Factory in Bristol Vic, or Manchester, you've got multiple, and London, obviously, you've got a kind of multiplicity of venues and artists and theatre companies. and you can build more concentration for a theatre community. What you've also got in Birmingham and Manchester and Liverpool is a drama school, and Bristol, and Leeds, when it lost Bretton Hall, I think that impacted on our theatrical ecology as well. And even though you've got some really good companies making work in and around West Yorkshire, I still feel that the theatre ecology isn't as strong as I'd like it to be. And I think we're part of that solution. They're just in the middle of building a new college right on our doorstep here, on Quarry Hill, which will house a degree level musical theatre and theatre course. So when we reopen, that course will open, and I'm really excited about that. I can see that in 10 years' time, we can be attracting students to stay or come and train here in theatre, and if we and others in the city are able to develop opportunities for artists, not just training musical theatre, but also independent artists and theatre makers, we can create platforms and opportunities for them to develop and make their work. Then I think we can start to build and develop the theatre ecology. I think the film and TV industry is also critical to that. I think Manchester has developed really robustly in recent years, and I look across the panels and there's a very rich indigenous theatre culture there. You could be an actor in Manchester and not have to live in London. It's harder to do that in Leeds. So I think that what we're trying to do with our artist development work is to enable directors and writers and actors and designers and producers to develop themselves here and to grow and evolve contacts and skills. I see that as part of our mission, really, as part of that's the responsibility of a regional theatre, to serve its region in that way. So in terms of our redevelopment period, we close our doors in the Quarry and the courtyard and the foyer at the end of June, and we won't be opening the doors for about a year. And we considered what to do in that time, and one option would be to do nothing or to do a couple of projects out and about, but it felt to us that there was a risk of losing momentum. So what we're doing instead is we're going to create an ensemble company of probably about 9 or 10 local actors. Well, I say local actors. We'd like a significant portion to be local actors. In a way, we want to be open and diverse as well. So we don't want to exclude somebody who's not from Leeds or from West Yorkshire, but we also want it to feel like its character is our character. And I think it's about that's about affirming a commitment to where we are. We'll also have a number of other projects around the core shows that we create. So there'll be opportunities for around about 30 performers over the course of that 9 to 10 months. And we're going to create a pop-up theatre on the site of the West Yorkshire Playhouse, just around the back a bit, which will seat about 350 people. And we're quite close to signing that programme off. So it's an interesting programme of work, which is going to be a mixture of classics and new work and contemporary plays, and we're going to work very much in the way that I've described in Dundee, where we'll make a show, and then when that show's playing, we'll be under rehearsing that and working as efficiently as possible. So for me, it's really exciting to be returning to that way of making work, and hopefully for the actors it will be a way to really be able to kind of create a roots down for a decent period of time and to build that ensemble spirit that I think is often the way you get the best theatre.
It sounds like a similar solution to the one that they hit on at the Lyric Hammersmith when they had a similar sort of period of kind of renovations, which meant that the main space, I think, was going to be was going to be altogether out of action, or at least mothballed. And they had this idea of, well, it was secret theatre.
Yes, I remember. We actually had a residency from. And I
know
Sean of it, and I know that he was very excited about working in that way. We spoke about it, and for me it's lovely. It does feel a bit like it's a version of the hardcore version, which is you're in for life.
The German version.
And actually, when I was in Dundee, we talked to Russian companies and Swiss companies. Really, really interesting. I'm excited that we're doing it in Leeds. The notion of whether you could do it here. I think it's harder. I considered that early in my time here. I think it's hard for lots of reasons, which is to do with the economy of British theatre, the way that agents work, the way that actors are based in their careers. In a way, Dundee was far enough away for people to say, I'm going to commit to this theatre, I'm going to move there, I'm going to get a mortgage, bring up a family. I think if you're as close to London as we are, it's really hard to say. And then if you say, well, just cast local actors, I think the repertoire that you can create becomes quite restricted. there's lots of reasons why it's a difficult thing to do here, even the RSC doesn't do it in the way that, So I think there are reasons why the British theatre model militates against it. But I think for a 9-month, 10-month period, it's a really brilliant way for us to explore making them work. And maybe after doing that, we'll continue to incorporate that way of making work in the future.
It sounds like an interesting kind of attempt to balance that sort of the integrity and the sort of honest conversations that you were referring to before, with that kind of nimbleness that you get from assembling a company per project.
It can be a real delight. You. And it can, and in a way, your flexibility is great to just rebuild and redesign and move on. That's so. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I think the Ensemble is the only way of doing it, but I think it has got real advantages. And what people always said when they joined the company for a period of time was people work so fast.
Right.
They couldn't believe the pace of working. It's what that shorthand is, where 3 days into rehearsal and you're kind of there where you need to be in the heart of it, rather than that like weird week of getting to know people. There's a rhythm to that doesn't make the work itself the point. And I think in the end it's about the work.
And it's nice that you also kind of are very careful to define ensemble and say ensemble isn't just a generic term that it means the same thing to everybody. I mean, again, thinking about 784 Scotland, I always remember John McGrath writing about it and sort of saying, in one breath he was sort of saying almost like it's a utopian thing that we had this ensemble, and then in the second he was saying, well, during Cheviot Stag and Black Oil, people were annoyed at each other because they were getting the lines wrong, or they were adding bits, or they were getting pissed before the show.
It's a kind of management thing in a way. It's a different sort of management. For me, it's about getting the best out of people, trying to deal with the challenge that working that way presents, because you can be on your best behaviour for a certain amount of time, but then in the end people's personalities come out, but if you can manage that and you can keep it moving forwards, it can be a very, very special, meaningful, and I think Cheviot Stag's a really good example of a show that in its time, and actually since it was revived, sort of got somewhere that probably if you just sat there and said, I've got this idea, let's get a company together, you wouldn't have got there. Scottish theatre sometimes feels like itself something of an ensemble. Actually, having now started working on this show with some Scottish actors who aren't based in Scotland, I'm not sure that non-Scotland based Scottish actors would quite agree, but it's a I don't know, there's a paradox, isn't there? There's the brilliant way of describing it would be a sort of knowledge and a connectivity, and the alternative way of describing it would be a sort of claustrophobic, insular, non-open approach. So I think for me, as the director of a company like that, it's about keeping the wind air blowing through it, the fresh air blowing through it, so it doesn't become stale, but not making it so sort of drafty that nobody can genuinely relax.
Yeah, that's lovely, thank you. If I could just ask you sort of maybe to talk about one other aspect of your work here. I don't want to keep you too late, because I know you've had a full day of rehearsals and I know it's not the last day this week that you are. But I was just really interested, and it ties together a lot of things we've been talking about. There was something I read about the redevelopment project which suggested that there's a consciousness of the relationship of West Yorkshire Playhouse with the city of Leeds. And that's sort of something which was kind of not necessarily right at the forefront of those kind of plans and proposals, but was definitely, at least in the subtext. And it's something you've talked about again here, the ecology, the local ecology. I mean, how do you see, because not everybody maybe has sort of delved into the plans for the redevelopment, but could you talk us through a bit, what those plans are for redevelopment, how it's going to affect the relationship of this place with the city of Leeds?
Well, I mean, maybe as somebody from Leeds, maybe it's a natural thing for me to reflect on. Maybe not. Maybe if you're not from Leeds, you'd reflect on that as well. But I suppose I remember going to the old Leeds Playhouse as a school kid and seeing shows there. I remember this theatre opening when I was probably about 22, so just really at the beginning of my career. And then coming back to it, I came back all the time because I can see my mum and dad and see pals whose work was on here, but coming back to it as the artistic director. And I don't know how many people who are listening have been here, but what this theatre, I think, was originally designed, the theatre that's now on Quarry Hill, it's called the West Yorkshire Playhouse, I think it was designed with a very much a community spirit at its heart. So the idea of pulling some of the plays I saw in the old Leeds Playhouse were pretty radical and quite out there, pulling that tradition together with a more socially oriented purpose. And Quarry Hill, of course, was the site of the biggest social housing experiment in Europe at the time, massive social housing development outside the walls of the city, in the medieval times, Quarry, because of quarantine hospital, nothing to do with the quarry. So the idea of this place, this part of the city, being an area that is one of exclusion in a way. So in my head, the narrative of bringing together great theatre and great art with a kind of community and social purpose, and that for me is what attracted me to come and work in this theatre, because I think those are two things that I'm passionate about, and I don't see reflected in many theatres in Britain to an equal extent. And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think they're mutually beneficial. And I think the design of this theatre building back in 1990 when it opened was to try and make it as unthreatening as possible, so that it didn't put anybody off. There's no stage door here, everybody comes through the same door. But people have said over the years, and I don't think unkindly, that from the outside it looks a bit like a swimming pool or a shopping centre or a supermarket or a council building. Yeah. Because it's very anonymous, you can't really see through it, that you can't see people. And for me, this theatre is about people. So you also have to, as you walk from the town centre, you have got to walk up basically 3 flights of stairs to get in, and then when you go into the Quarry Theatre, walk back down those 3 flights of stairs to get into your seat. It presents to the city a car park, some bins and an access grill. You wouldn't know what it was if you were sitting on the bus.
Sort of turning its back on
its back on the city. And again, when I arrived back here, some of the feedback I got was that the theatre itself seemed to have turned its back on the city, both kind of creatively in a sense, and also just in the way that it felt like it was connected. It felt like that theatre on the hill. And so that felt to me a bit of a problem, and one that I, having come from Dundee, where that theatre felt so integrated in its community, and where even if the taxi driver said I've never been, but I know where the Rep is and it's great to have it here, didn't feel like that for the West Yorkshire Playhouse. So I suppose in a very simplistic way in relation to the redevelopment, what it felt like is we needed to turn the theatre around, and quite quickly I said we need to turn the theatre around. We needed to face the city. We needed the city to feel it embracing, opening its arms to the city and letting it in. And in a way, that's quite a graphic way of describing it, but I think it was effective. And everybody I spoke to who cares kind of said, yeah, I can see what you mean. So what that effectively meant was, let's put an entrance at the front of the theatre where the city is, rather than at the back of the theatre, away from where the city is. And we went through two different feasibility. We went through a feasibility study which put a box on the front and a door and an escalator up 3 flights of stairs, and then we worked with some Scottish architects, Page Park, who were doing the scheme, and they had this absolutely brilliant idea, and you'd have to know the building for this to fully make sense, but rather than just getting people from the new front door to where the theatres currently are, to open the building up from the inside. It's a bit like a heart whose arteries need clearing. So in a way, what we're going to do is we're going to open the building up from within. Right. So there's no danger that the front and the back become detached from each other. And that to me is really revolutionary, because what that makes this project about more than anything else is access. About accessibility through the front door, through the theatre. So instead of the one entrance we currently have, we'll have 3 entrances in the new theatre. Our old entrance, our new entrance, and one halfway up, linking with the new college. So it's all about permeability. It's all about people who haven't got brilliant mobility being able to get into their seat as easily as possible, rather than have to go up and down vertiginous sets of steps. It's also about giving ourselves the opportunity to create work which is riskier, smaller scale, has less physical investment. So we're going to have a studio theatre, which is going to be built in the basement. There was always an idea of making a studio theatre, but the resource wasn't there when the theatre opened. And I think that people call the courtyard the studio theatre. It's not a studio theatre. It seats 350. Yeah. It's about the same size as the Almeida and the Royal Court. It's a space that is hard to take artistic risk in. It's hard to place the work of an artist who's not as experienced, or for whom you don't expect necessarily to generate the same kind of audience. It's hard to put that work in there, and that's really constrained our ability to support that theatre ecology of the city. So,
I mean, recently, sorry to interrupt, you've been opening up the rehearsal rooms much more than I've seen in the past year. I think the first thing I saw there was probably a secret theatre, actually. Well, we just, in my time here, I'm like, well, we need to get these artists into our repertoire. Because in a way, if we don't, then we will seem to be old-fashioned. We'll seem to be just the repertory theatre that puts these plays on by people you've heard of. Not exclusively, of course we create new work on those larger stages, but we can't enable artists who are making work on that smaller level to be part of our programme. We can't enable audiences to see it in our theatre. And I want our theatre to be able to offer diversity in its programme. So consciously, we have
built an audience by turning our rehearsal room into a studio theatre, and I reckon probably for 14 to 16 weeks a year we do that. Of course, we need it to rehearse it, so we're constrained. And also, it's really difficult to put the infrastructure in and take it out and put it in.
It's a bit mazy getting there, and there are accessibility issues.
It's not great. And actually, in a way, it's too big for a studio.
Yeah.
You can get probably about 200 seats in there, So we're going to have a purpose-built, accessible studio theatre, which will have quite a different aesthetic from the other spaces and a new theatre space. I was sitting in the Arches in Glasgow, and I thought, you want this kind of rough feel, and you want to be able to put things in here that you wouldn't want to put in other spaces, and that's so that we can make shows and work in there. We can use it for enable other artists to make work and tour work in. So I think that's going to be a game changer as well. I think access is the theme, and in a way that's access for artists to make and develop work. I mean, no doubt after a certain amount of time we'll continue to use the Barber Studio to rehearse, to make work as well, because one of my definitions of successful theatre is a theatre in which the space is always full, in which people are sort of, there's always kind of rubbing up against each other. One of the joys of this theatre in particular is when you've got the Quarry in the courtyard, and hopefully in the future the Bramwell Rock Void.
Can we just say that excellent name again, please? That is one of the
Bramwell Rock Void.
It sounds like a prog rock album.
It does.
Somebody on that wasn't mine. I think somebody on Twitter said that.
But it's called the Rock Void, and it's a pretty extraordinary space when you go into it, buried underneath the current box service. And the reason it's called the Bramwell Rock Void is because we've got a donation from a brilliant local trust fund who've been hugely supportive. It's a massive donation towards the project, and so we've named it after them. So what I love about this theatre is when an audience comes out of one theatre and, like a tributary of a river, joins another audience being disgorged. And sometimes that can be beautifully, bizarrely contrasting. And I love it when that happens. Sometimes it can feel, it's a bit like blending flavours. You get different audiences interested in different things, and they come out and they meet in our great big democratic foyer. We're going to keep that foyer, that sort of meeting point. We are, I think, as a civic theatre, a place for people to meet and to engage. It's a place for conversation about what it means to be human. It's a place for ideas and emotions and beauty and challenge. And that can be both on our stages, but also within our kind of creative engagement work and our participatory work and our artist development work. We're an increasingly rare environment in modern Britain, where you can come in, you can sit down, you can get a glass of water, you can do what you want. Nobody's going to move you on or tell you to go or to make you buy something. You can just be in that space, and people do use our theatre, whether it's a knitting group or a bloke practising his guitar in his headphones, or, we don't ask questions unless people are being really antisocial. Not many theatres are like that. And when people write about the problem of buildings, and they write about, the buildings and gobbling up resource, I challenge that. We've got a massively diverse user group, from refugee and asylum seekers to learning disabled young people, to our dementia group, to people who want to come and see Strictly Ballroom, to kids come and see George and Marston Medicine, to artists who are developing some weird and wacky piece of work. We can serve all of those people. That's what we're about. And I really take on the chin this sense of, buildings are for the elite. No, this theatre isn't. I defy people to say it isn't. It's for anybody.
That's a great note to end on, I think. James Brining, thanks so much for joining us. Just to say, Sunshine on Leith opens on the 20th of April, I think, and runs till about the 19th of May. And there's a whole programme running up until the end of June, programme of events which showcase exactly what you're talking about in terms of diversity of kind of interests, tastes, audiences. James, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.